Hi, I'm Bill Doherty, and I want to welcome the viewers to another edition of Bill's Bullpen. Bill's Bullpen is a program to talk about regional activities and regional programs. And with me today is my dear friend Maura Weir. Welcome, Maura.
Hello, Bill.
Maura, tell the people what you do for a living.
Oh boy. All right, so I wear a lot of hats, but my main job is I work at Cape Cod Community College, and I'm the Chief Wellness Officer, and I oversee about 3,500 students' mental health and well-being.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. We have clinicians, we have case managers, and we also have a wellness promotion and services program. So we put on activities, events, help students understand depression, anxiety, physical activity. It's great. We actually follow the 8 dimensions of wellness, Bill.
Tell me about that.
So we have spiritual wellness, physical wellness, environmental wellness, emotional wellness, and sometimes people just can't balance that wellness wheel. And so they might be doing well in their financial wellness, but maybe their physical wellness isn't so hot at the time. So we try to make sure that they have a balanced wellness wheel, so in the end of the day that they can do well in their academics and be successful at college. So we run different programs like Move Your Mental Health, and we use physical activities for that. We have like a de-stress fest around exam times. We do a lot of training in suicide prevention and maybe helping in the aftermath of a suicide in the community as well through our corporate education program that's based in Hyannis.
Corporate education program?
Yeah, we have a program called CCAPE, and it's community education programs, and it's run out of Cape Cod Community College. So they have partnered with the Cape and Islands Suicide Prevention Coalition to offer the suicide prevention trainings in the region.
Well, I remember having gone to a couple of suicide prevention, I don't know what you might say, proclamations or and I don't want to use the word exposure, but let's say people talking about, their direct experience, with that. And I think that one of your extra duties is.
Oh yeah, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Cape and Islands Suicide Prevention Coalition.
Okay. And one of the things that I think people should appreciate is that when a suicide happens, it affects more than just the person that takes their life. And perhaps this is an opportunity to sort of pass on Catholic guilt to more people about you shouldn't do this because you're going to hurt you're going to hurt somebody you care about.
And sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes it's not. But we know that if there's a suicide that happens in the community, there's about 125 people that are exposed to that suicide.
And 125 people? Like what?
Maybe say if it happened in the high school or in the workplace, that there would be 125 people that were exposed to the suicide. And then from that, there's about 25 that are severely impacted from the suicide. So that could be family members, friends, colleagues, and things like that. And so we try to do some programming with those 25 people too, because they have witnessed it, felt it, and severely impacted by the suicide and the loss of the loved one. And so sometimes they feel a little bit unsupported, and so we try to do that as well.
How do you do that?
So we have different programs, but we do run one training. It's called a post-vention training. And sometimes if we're invited to a community, we'll run a program on how to work together as a community after a suicide happens and what that might look like to support. So I often say, sometimes people say, oh, how you doing? You say, oh, I'm fine, thank you, and you move on. And in this case, you kind of have to wait and hear the answer.
Well, the truth of it is that it's like a knee-jerk reaction because I once responded to a question like that, how you doing? I said, thank you so much for asking. Life right now is terrible. And I started going through a list of things, and you could see one of these things. What?
That's right. That's right. And it happens a lot. And people say like they don't know what to say to someone maybe who lost someone to suicide. And so we say, instead of saying like, let me know if you need anything, what we're saying is, what can I do? How can I help? It might be drop over a lasagna dinner. It might be offer to take the children. It might be go over and have tea. Because at that moment in time, they've just had this incredible, horrible experience, so sad. Sometimes they don't know what they need. And so if we could help them in a way that they don't have to ask for help, that we just deliver the help.
That is such an important thing to say, because as you go through things, one of the problems is you're at a loss to respond to that kind of an offer, okay, because you don't really know what to say, and if and you recognize the good intentions that are involved, but you also recognize that it's like a formula, okay. There's the there's the business of, let's say, of going through the steps of let's say of acceptance and understanding about what's happened if you are someone who's lost a significant other through suicide. Now, statistics are something that when I had the 3 courses in statistics, business, science, and then the magic one, social statistics, is that there was a tendency to look at at what I'd call the immediacy of numbers. Now, when you're measuring the issue here on Cape Cod, what do the numbers look like?
So we've been tracking the numbers for me for about 15 years now. I'm a little, I am a little bit passionate about this, and I am a suicidologist, so I really do the research into who's dying, where are they dying, and what population is it, right? And so we look at age, gender, location, and maybe method as well. And what we're trying to figure out is there a group of people that are more vulnerable to suicide, and do we need to target that specific area or geographic location or something like that? And we always look at 5-year trends, because sometimes you could have 1 year where there's a dip in suicides, which is great, but then the next year they kind of surpass our number. So in the 15 years that I've been looking at the suicide trends on the Cape, we're around 30 per year. 30 per year. My worry is that people get passionate about it and excited about it, and then they think that this is, an epidemic, and that is not the case. There are so many people that have suicide ideation that do not die by suicide.
Sadly, my experience with observing suicide ideation is that it's at the time of expression is not the time to really be concerned, because there is the issue of having enough strength to what we used to call complete. And what do they call it now?
We tried to ask people to use words that are non-stigmatizing, and so we're saying, instead of saying successful suicide, which I hear all the time, we're trying to say died by suicide, or suicided. You can use the ED at the end and it's suicided. It should be something like when someone dies by cancer. What happened? Cancer. What happened? It was a suicide. That's it. Sometimes people use language like, oh, there was a failed suicide on the Cape over the weekend. These people already feel bad enough that they're having thoughts of suicide. We shouldn't make them feel like they failed at that as well. So we tried to say a non-fatal, which means they may have had an attempt, but they did not die. And then they used to use words like completion, but now they're saying that that's not a good thing to do either. So we're trying to just be mindful not to stigmatize it more. I remember one time I was at a session, and a woman went up to another woman and said, I'm sorry that your son committed suicide. And the woman stepped back and she said, my son didn't do anything wrong. Because sometimes, Bill, with the word committed, it has negative connotations to it. People commit murder, they commit sin, they commit adultery, right? It's got that, like, it's wrong. And so when people use the phrase, they committed suicide, it almost sometimes implies that it was wrong.
No, you're bringing up a reminder of when I studied philosophy at Boston College, and we read Sartre, and one of the things that Sartre says is that in the state of our life, the only thing we really have control over personally is the ability to end it. Okay, so that is an unfortunate choice, but it remains a choice. And sadly, I don't know how to put this, but we want people to recognize that although it is a choice, it is an extraordinarily bad choice to make, because as I personally believe, where there's life, there's hope. And as long as you have life, there's an opportunity to, let's say, to move things around so that you can have some way of dealing with with the issue that's let's say that's bearing you down. Now, I think there's a distinction that you have to make, because there is clinical depression, that is not controllable, and that clinical depression might interfere with what I would call a realistic approach to addressing, let's say, the background of what's going on. Now, how do you deal with people who are, let's say, I don't want to use the word legitimate, but have actual depression that that is clinically diagnosed, under what was a DSM, whatever it is. Okay, so how do you distinguish between among folks that are just, let's say, expressing ideation, and folks that are clinically depressed? How do you approach these?
So I think one thing to keep in mind, and I do look at the statistics, is only 5% of people that have depression go on to die by suicide. The others either live with it or they get treatment for it, right? And we do have some services on the Cape, such as outreach programs or inpatient programs, and we also have community groups that will help support that. I think the Department of Public Mental Health deals with the clinical side of it, where they work with them on their medications, they work with them on counseling. Counseling and medication combined is very effective.
Okay, the so-called therapeutic liaison is very important, but that also takes a significant amount of time. And if you're, let's say, if you're Joe, let's say, blue collar, you're not going to have a hell of a lot of time off from your job in order to do that. Are there alternatives?
Well, I think some of the trainings that we offer, for example, is QPR. It's like a 1 hour, I just call it down and dirty, get the basics in. And that is only making people aware of the warning signs and the symptoms, and to make the referral, to have them know what's available in the community, whether it's the Samaritans or Duffy or the Community Health Center of Cape Cod.
Let's see, I used to know was Heidi. I think she's retired.
She just retired.
But Duffy, I never thought of them as being let's say, other than dealing with homeless.
Well, actually, they have a very good suicide prevention program there.
Wow.
Yep, and they have.
And by the way, Duffy's in Hyannis.
Yep, yeah, that's right. And they receive grant funding to train their staff. So their staff are very well trained in suicide prevention, and they do a lot of initiatives for people that might have mental health concerns and suicide ideation at the same time.
Let's talk a little bit about, without getting to a stage where you're finding things that aren't there. What are some of the things that would make you aware that there is an issue with regard to this?
So things we think about are like, are they having suicidal ideation, and is it vocal? Because there used to be a myth that if people were talking about it, they weren't going to do it. That is just not true.
Oh, absolutely not
true. They put it on social media. They tell a loved one. They tell colleagues at work. It's not always as direct as it should be, but we have to kind of put our inspector kind of hat on, or investigate some of these matters and see what they're talking about. But we're looking for, if they're talking about it, if they have mentioned how they might do it. We're looking for, sometimes we see an increase in substance misuse, or they go off it altogether. A lot of withdrawal from family and friends. They may not respond to texts or emails or phone calls. We also see if someone's talking about, I have no purpose in life, or I feel like a burden. And sometimes I worry about our elder folks on the Cape, because that is something that we hear from them a lot. And then we also have things like maybe giving away the things that they like to their friends. But it's not just one thing, Bill, like you said. We're looking for a series of things that altogether might indicate they're thinking about suicide. And our job, I feel like, is to be aware of those signs and recognize them. And that's why I think the training is so important, because you know what, Bill? They only see their psychiatrist or their social worker maybe 1 hour a week.
No, there used to be, and I still still true,
Yeah.
that there's a shortage of psychiatrists
There
on the
is,
Cape.
indeed.
And it seems the psychiatrists that are there are only basically, let's say, filters for distributing medication. And so in terms of what is the population density of, let's say, of people trained in dealing with mental health issues, of people that can manage it? Because there is the worried well, as we used to call it when I was doing more advocacy work, and there is the people who are legitimately and completely, let's say, captured by a mental health and a mental issue. And of course, we're now facing what I'd call the anxiety-raising issue of being threatened with losing Pocasset, the mental health center. That's going on now, and I believe that people should be aware of what an important resource that is. We already lost the teenage, say facilities over at over at Cape Cod Hospital, and when I was on the patient and family advisory group that was over there, we did work, let's say, to have a better understanding of the fact that you can't get a referral to a rehab unless you have 3 midnights admitted in a hospital. And they were basically storing people in the emergency room. And I think that's still going on because they haven't changed the legislation. So is there, now that you're involved in the system, what are some of the things that we should ask people to do for supporting the advocacy that is so important?
Well, we just saw it, right? They had a big town meeting in Bourne there last week or the week before about saving Pocasset, and Governor Healy has put a stay on it. And
yeah, that was in the paper this morning.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is the community spirit. That is the community power. Like together, as a community, we can work towards the achievements that we're looking for. And when that many people got out and showed up and made a little noise, the governor listened, and I think we need to do more of that. Bill, I always say suicide is biological, psychological, and social. And I call it the perfect storm. All of these things have to exist at the same time in order for the act of suicide to happen, okay? And it's not an individual problem. It's a community problem.
Exactly what I wanted you to get on, because the idea is that although we might all come together, let's say, to respond to what I would call a catastrophic event like the closing of a facility, what can we do in an ordinary way to be helpful, not just to people that are expressing ideation, but to create what I would call not a let's say a Mary Two Shoes good, kind of thing. But what can we do to, let's say, to reduce the hostility and the polarization that we're facing? Because I think that's a significant contributor to the way people are feeling about themselves.
Absolutely. I think one of the things to do is increase the protective factors in our regions, right? And if you look at it, the funding for suicide prevention work comes from the Department of Public Health, okay? And so it's
And not the Department of Mental Health?
Department of Mental Health also contributes, but they do more of the clinical aspect, individual work, whereas the suicide prevention coalitions that we have around the state that's supported by the Department of Public Health, that's where the funding comes for us. And it's to create community support programs in the regions so that everyday people can make the difference. And it's a public health concern, just like diabetes, just like smoking. It's going to take the community to make the changes that they want to make. It's about the social determinants of health. It's about having what you need: access, transportation, housing. These are all influential when people think about something like suicide. If they don't feel like they belong and they don't feel connected, and maybe they feel like a burden to themselves, or their family, or society, it becomes a community issue. I spent a lot of time in Ireland. I do a lot of work in Europe. I did my master's in Australia.
Oh, Australia, one of my favorite places to go.
Fantastic. They have figured this out.
They love Americans, especially American women.
They had a 50% reduction in suicide rates after they wrote the National Strategic Plan.
Really?
And you know how they did it? They involved the community. It's not a medical model that they use in Australia. It's a community prevention model. And that's what we have to do more of here.
Now,
You
how
must
would you
think
start
about it.
doing that?
Think about it, Bill. You must stop thinking, what's wrong with this person that they want to die by suicide? The question should be, what's wrong with this community that they don't want to live here?
Good point. So what is wrong with this community
Well,
that we could, let's say, that we have some opportunity to really look at something that we can change? Because I remember the thing in my youth was if you light one little candle, it makes a big difference. So what is the one little candle we all should be thinking about?
I think if we could increase the protective factors, feeling like you belong in a school system, feeling like you belong in the community, getting connected with supports, being able to get to the support. Access is huge. Transportation is huge. Like, we don't have the ability here to have 24-hour running buses and things like that. It just doesn't exist.
Well, speaking defensively, because I was on the RTA for several years, we did add more buses for the Lower Cape.
Great.
Okay,
Great.
And when we did that, and I remember that mothers would come up to me and said how grateful they were that their kids could be picked up at the library and they didn't have to take time off from work to do it. But of course, there was the problem on what I'd call periodicity of when the bus would show up. So he had to know the schedules. But kids seem to be able to get that more than the elders did, and ironically, we had set up a lot of this stuff with the anticipation that the elders would use it, but they wanted a free taxi ride for $1, whereas the kids understood if they wanted to get to the skate park or something like that, they figured out how to do it, and so far, that has been helpful. Okay, but transportation, let's say, to get to help, housing, because you have to have an address in order to, let's say, in order to provide some stability in your life. And then there's a business about the adequacy of treatment when, say, when you do have the transportation to get there. So what needs to be done there?
Well, we do have a shortage of mental health and clinical social workers, psychiatrists, and psychologists on the Cape. So I think that if we could make this a more attractive salaries or wages or benefits, that we could attract more people to come here to work and stay here. And the other thing is he's also making the hours suitable for people that are looking for it.
Now that's the thing that has always bugged me, because having a 9 to 5 availability for treatment and the fact that these are the same hours that people have to work, I've often wondered, because I remember when they opened the community center down in Harwich, for example.
Great place.
And one of the problems that I saw was that instead of having the community center open from noon to like 8 o'clock at night, they were open from 9 to 5, and so it took almost an act of God to have it available for the kids in the afternoon and early evening, so they would have some place to go, which supposedly was the intent, that they would be mixing the elders and the seniors and all be in the same space together. Okay, so anyway,
intergenerational work is great. It's very effective when you bring together people like that with the elders and the young people together. There's magic to be done there.
So how can we, now that's something that I've always been intrigued with doing, because I was a substitute teacher for a while, and you could see that a lot of kids just needed somebody they could ventilate to, that weren't going to make judgments and tell them, well, you ought to do this and you ought to do that. And of course I'm reminded of my Italian grandmother, who used to let me vent and bitch about things, and then at the end of it she would say, well, it sounds like you know what your problem is, so I'm sure you'll be able to solve it. So how can we encourage more elders to do that, more guys to do that, because there's a gender-related issue. If you're asking me a question, you're asking me to solve it, when the truth is you just want somebody to listen to you and nod and say, well, it looks like you understand what your problem is, now you can go solve it. Because I would say, in my opinion, that's probably at the root of a lot of, let's say, a lot of well-intentioned but ineffectual activity on the part of people. So, believe it or not, we're almost at the end of this.
Can I give you a thought?
Go ahead.
In one of the countries, so loneliness and isolation are really, really big since COVID. And people have a lot of social anxiety, so it's getting out more. It's doing more activities. Bourne is great at that. They've got a lot of young people out doing things. But in some countries, they made benches, and they put benches on street corners and in different locations where people would pass. And they then trained volunteers, elder volunteers, to sit on the bench. And then people would come and talk to them on the bench. And this is a campaign that they're running. And you know what? It's working. People
What countries are doing this?
There was one in Africa that's doing it, and there's one in Europe that's doing it. I can get more information on it, but I thought it was outstanding.
That is outstanding.
They brought the volunteers out from the elder population and put them out on the benches, and they're having that non-judgmental listening, empathy, and installation of hope. It's really powerful. Those are the things we need to be working on.
So that looks like there's one thing that we could do to encourage that, because once the bench goes in, it's not going to cost anything to have somebody sit on it. What that reminds me of is, in the original Greek philosophers would basically have symposiums, which means good around a wine barrel, but they would sit around a tree, and then people would come and talk to them. And perhaps that's a way of getting a better balance in their life. Okay, now we're almost done. What would be the takeaway you would want folks to have from our discussion today?
I would say, if you know someone that's feeling suicidal, if you don't know what to do, talk to them, listen non-judgmentally, maybe give them reassurance and the proper information, and then maybe get them to think about getting help or asking for community supports.
Just one final thing. When I was in the service, I was a company commander, and one of my lieutenants came to me and said, "I've taken a gun out of the, out of the arms room, and I'm thinking about using it." So I said to him, first of all, I said, "You're working for me. You got a job, and I'm expecting you to do it. The second thing is, I want you to go see the division psychologist, and I want you to tell me you don't have to tell me what you told him, but I want you to come back." Now, the psychologist called me afterwards and said, "You did exactly the right thing." So, and I was saying, "How the hell did I know that?" So, but then again, all Irish are psychic, aren't we? Okay, but anyway, thank you very much,
No problem.
Maura, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And more, and if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, they just go to the college, right?
I'm there. Everyone knows who I am.
Maura Weir down at Four Seas, one of the big, I'm sure that President Cox is telling you what a wonderful job you're doing.
President Cox has been very supportive of mental health and well-being initiatives.
And I'm delighted to hear it.
I would say CISPC.net is the website for the Cape Island Suicide Prevention Coalition.
Okay, we'll also print that at the bottom.
CISPC.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for watching. You've been watching a program that perhaps is a subject that you might not think about all the time, but it's something that is going on and you should be aware of. And I want to thank Maura for coming, and I want to thank the viewers for watching another edition of Bill's Bullpen, a production of Bourne TV.